People call these things imperfections, but they're not. Oh, that's the good stuff. And then we get to choose who we let into our weird little worlds.
So this is episode 3 of me going through the therapy scenes in the film Good Will Hunting. I'd hope it's not essential that you've seen the film or watched my previous videos to follow this one, but I'll leave the link for them below, and let me just quickly summarise things so far. In session 1, Will tried attacking Sean because he wanted to get kicked out and not have to go to therapy anymore. Sean lost his cool but does still want to see Will next week to try and repair things. In session 2, Sean tells Will about his wife Steph and that Will is never going to get anywhere until he drops his bullshit and actually opens up. Session 3 and possibly 4 passed by in total silence. Last time I talked about silence and what it means in the session. Now today, another session has almost passed by in total silence until finally Will decides to speak. All the disclaimers were at the start of my first video, but yes, I'm a psychodynamic counsellor. No, I wouldn't necessarily do all the things Sean does as a therapist here. That doesn't mean either of us are wrong though. It means A, there's a ton of different approaches to therapy, and B, therapy more than any techniques and stuff is about the sincere relationship of two human beings, which means that every therapist will do things a bit differently. I'm also not going to go too deep into confusing jargon and explain convoluted techniques and psychoanalysis because it will just get a bit long-winded and it's not always necessary anyway. But enough of that, let's just get going, shall we? I like the transition into this scene. We go from the last scene where Will's doing maths with the snobby physicist showing off, and you got Jerry sitting back in a chair fiddling with a rubber band ball. Then to this scene where the image sort of flips and it's Sean sitting back in a chair fiddling with his fingers. Throughout the film, Sean and Jerry are kind of opposed parental figures over Will who have opposite approaches, but that's something we'll talk about more in a later video. I just wanted to point out the nice opposite imagery here, that's all. So Sean is whistling because he's bored. He sat there for probably about 45 minutes in total silence. You'd expect him to be bored. But then the camera switches and we see Will's face. He actually looks incredibly bored himself. He flicks between looking at the clock and looking at Sean. You see in his face that he's fed up with the silence and is debating whether or not to speak. And then the camera cuts again, very much from Will's perspective now, to see Sean fully nodding off. He genuinely falls asleep, which is the exact moment Will picks to finally speak.
You know,
that's no coincidence. One, because talking is a means to wake Sean up. As though Will is saying, hey, you're not allowed to sleep on my time, okay? This is my time, I'm supposed to be important, you're supposed to sit here and acknowledge me, not fall asleep. And two, because it's a bit like springing on Sean here and saying, you know, ha, you lost the battle of silence, you couldn't maintain concentration, that means I win, I'm the one with the higher ground. And yet, of course, technically Will doesn't win because in doing this he's been the one to speak first. But in reality it's not actually a battle of silence between them though, that's just how it feels to Will. I talked about this in the last episode. But what it's really about is giving Will whatever time and space he needs until he's ready to open up. Choosing the moment Sean is asleep to start opening up makes sense because it feels a safer moment. You know, if you're worried about how the therapist will react to you, Sean being asleep is a moment when he's a bit off guard, you know, and he's lost a bit of face. He appears weaker. That's a good moment to start.
I was on this plane once, and I'm sitting there, and captain gets on, he does this whole, you know, we'll be cruising at 35,000 feet, but then he puts the mic down, he forgets to turn it off. And so he turns to the co-pilot, and he's like, you know, all I could use right now is a fucking blowjob and a cup of coffee. So the stewardess fucking goes bombing up from the back of the plane to tell him that the microphone's still on. This guy in the back of the plane's like, hey, hon, don't forget the coffee.
Why does Will tell a joke? More so, why does he tell a joke about blowjobs to his counsellor? You know, there's nothing wrong in doing that, but it's not what you'd expect, is it? I mean, Will is stepping out of the social norm to tell this joke, which means he must have some reason. And there's 3 reasons I'm going to pick up on. One is the obvious one, that telling a joke is breaking the ice in a way. It's getting the therapeutic ball rolling, let's say, without having to open up about anything personal yet. You know, they've had silence. Telling a joke is like tentatively dipping your toe into the water. The second reason is because Sean is from Southie like Will, and Will wants to test how much Sean is like him. This is the sort of joke me and my mates enjoy down the pub. Do you enjoy it too? And it's nice Will is testing that out, because I spoke a lot in the first video about how Will sees Sean like an oppressive figure of authority and an abuser he has to attack. Well, here he's not exactly seeing Sean in another light, but he is testing out if Sean can be seen in another light, if that makes sense. You know, what if you're not an oppressor, but more like one of my mates? What if you can be on my side? Let's see if that's possible. Which links to the third reason, because yeah, he's testing if Sean can be like one of Will's mates, but it's not just he's testing, it's also he's trying to make Sean be like one of them. You know, he's trying to push him into that role of my mate, you know? Because we do cast characters in our lives. Mostly Will casts everyone as this oppressive abuser he needs to fight back against. Similar to what I said about Andrew in my video on the Breakfast Club, but that's not the only character Will casts. He also casts people in the role of laddish mate he can go to the pub with and crack jokes about blowjobs with, you know? We all do this sort of casting on some small level. I've got mates I make dumb jokes with, then I've got other ones I might talk more emotionally to, you know? I've got people I see like a father figure or a mother figure. People I see like kids for me to be the father figure to. You know, people I see like my older brother or whatever it is. We've all got these different guidelines we've learned about how to interact with people. And because we like what's familiar, we test out these same guidelines on new people we meet, trying to find the guideline that fits them out of our select few, you know? And they're doing the same thing to us until we both find a middle ground between the two. For most of us, we have a bigger cast of characters and we don't force people too intensely into fitting those roles. But Will has two basic characters here. There's probably more if we went deeper, but for this video, let's just say basically two. Either they're an outsider who wants to attack me, and I need to fight back against, or they're an insider I can joke around with, which, as a way of viewing the world, fits into the very gang-like feel he has with his mates. There's insiders and then there's outsiders, you know? Anyway, the point I'm slowly getting towards is that Sean is neither of those things. He's not Will's enemy, he's not this oppressive abuser, but he's not exactly his friend either. He's his counsellor. You don't go to Sean to crack jokes and have a laugh, do you? You go to explore your feelings. So when Will tries to cast Sean in this role as one of his mates, Sean needs to resist that a little. He needs to kind of keep one foot outside of that and continue to be this hard-thinking, reflective person instead. Because this is a point worth saying. Going to therapy is hard work, just like going to the gym is hard work, just like any attempt at self-improvement is hard work. Some people think they can just get a therapist and basically sit there for an hour a week and expect it to turn their lives around, but no, you know, these are your feelings. You're only going to get so far if you leave the therapist to do all the hard thinking. You need to reflect yourself too. Not everyone will be able to reflect and think hard, so the counsellor sort of gradually trains their reflective muscles, helps them to get better at it. The aim is for your client to reach a point where he does all the thinking himself. Obviously this takes time and you need to go slowly to begin with, but what you don't want to do is let your client's laziness, his hesitancy to do the hard work, put you, the counsellor, off the hard thinking too. As such, Sean doesn't particularly laugh at the joke.
You ever been on a plane?
Despite the fact he likes this joke, and we know he likes this joke because we later hear him tell it down the pub to his local landlord. But Sean's job isn't to sit here laughing hard, encouraging Will to make more jokes. His job is to reflect on the meaning behind things, so that's his focus.
You ever been on a plane?
Which in many ways you can see as a simple question to keep the conversation going, but I think it links back metaphorically to their conversation at the park bench. The idea of Will reading all sorts of stuff but not actually experiencing it. You know, he can tell a joke and make it sound like he's been on a plane, but he hasn't actually been on a plane, as Will confirms in his response.
No, but it's a fucking joke. It works better if I tell it in the first person.
Yeah, it does.
Sean agrees and then looks on expectantly because he senses there's something else Will wants to say. It's very important you leave pauses to give your client a chance to express things.
I have been laid, you know.
That line always makes me laugh when I see this film because it refers back to the park bench scene. In the middle of Sean's speech there, he said to Will,
If I ask you about women, probably give me a syllabus of your personal favourites. You may have even been laid a few times.
It was just a throwaway example Sean used for the larger point he was making back then, but clearly the comment bothered Will. You may have even been laid a few times. It stuck with him enough that he felt it was important 2 or 3 weeks later to make it clear to Sean that he has indeed been laid. And when Sean says,
Really? Good for you.
in general indifferent sort of manner, he adds braggingly,
Big time. Big time, huh?
you know, it was desperately important for Will to tell his therapist. It's the second thing he tells his therapist after weeks of silence. I have been laid big time. Because at that age, losing your virginity feels important. Because we're stupid, we attach a lot of emotional pride to it and build it up into some massive rite of passage. So on one part, I think mentioning this is another attempt to interact with Sean like a mate from the pub he can talk to and joke about women to, but it's also about making the point to Sean, I am a man. I'm your equal, you're not better than me. Which again, in general, is like tentatively dipping his toe a little bit further into the therapeutic water.
I went on a date last week.
How'd it go?
It was good.
You going out again?
Lots of very short sentences at the moment here because long emotional answers aren't something Will's quite ready for yet. So Sean's choosing not to focus on the surface level meaning here, the fact Will's bragging. Instead he hones in on the other point that he went on a date last week. So it's not exactly recent, and actually if you track it the date was at least 2 weeks ago because it came before the park bench scene. Then there was a session in total silence that Sean talked to Jerry about. Then this session now, so it might have been even longer than 2 weeks ago. That's the bit Sean's zeroing in on. Why so long since you last saw her? Only he phrases it in a less confrontational way.
I don't know.
Why not?
I haven't called her.
Christ, you're an amateur.
I wouldn't think that's a common thing therapists would say in this situation. You know, it could come across as quite confrontational, but he says it tongue-in-cheek and Will says,
I know what I'm doing. Yeah. Don't worry about me, I know what I'm doing.
which again is Will's bragging, and I think that little laugh is also mocking the idea that Sean would be some sort of expert on women. Anyway, Will finds himself actually talking now. The ball has gotten rolling, so maybe the slightly tongue-in-cheek poking fun at Will being an amateur comment actually worked.
Yeah, but this girl's like, beautiful. She's smart, she's fun. It's different from most of the girls I've been with.
So call her up, Romeo.
Sean's persisting with this point, why haven't you called her? Because it's the heart of what Will is expressing.
Why? So I can realize she's not that smart, that she's fucking boring? This girl's like fucking perfect right now. I don't want to ruin that.
And I consider this a grade A response from Sean.
Maybe you're perfect right now. Maybe you don't want to ruin that.
I love that reply because he's making an interpretation here, a small one, but he's managed to do it in very few words, very concise, which is important. If you can make your points in short, bite-sized chunks like that, your client will be much more likely to actually take in what you're saying. Because it's not that Will would have got confused or not understood the point if Sean had taken more words, less bite-sized chunks to say it. Will's a smart kid, he'd obviously understand perfectly on an intellectual level, but it wouldn't have the emotional impact. You're trying to reach the heart with what you say, not just pepper them with a load of intellectual theorising. It's like poetry. Lines that are short and sweet hit much harder. It's the same principle here. So if you're going to make an interpretation to your client, it helps to keep it short and sweet, but also not to jam it in anywhere, not to force the point into a conversation out of nowhere. Sean has taken what Will has said and reversed it perfectly to provide a new perspective. And the final point on interpretations, it's always good to start with words like maybe or perhaps, because Sean might be wrong about what he's saying here. He's only met Will 3 times, he doesn't know him that well, so he says maybe. It's more like a suggestion, raising a possible idea rather than telling Will exactly how it is. The good counsellor is aware that he can never fully understand his client. The good counsellor can't assume the interpretations or the ideas he has are correct. He just can't assume that because sometimes they won't be. And that's fine. It's not about trying to tell your client exactly how it is. It's about raising ideas to play about with, see what fits for the client, help them to think it through, explore a little,
I think that's a super philosophy, Will. That way you can go through your entire life without ever having to really know anybody.
Sean is quite a teasing therapist, really, which wouldn't suit some clients at all. It'd wind them up, but not Will. I guess Sean judged Will is someone he can use humour with. And I think if a counsellor can use humour, they should. As long as it's natural and authentic, And as long as it's only light and doesn't kind of detract from the work. Because like I said earlier, they're not here to crack jokes, but a light, loving, small bit of humour is a good way to take the sting out of some of the interpretations or comments you may make at times, Plus, I did that video a while back on the importance of playfulness, didn't I? Because it's healthy not to take things too seriously. It's healthy if you can promote a more playful, slightly amused sort of curiosity about exploring yourself.
My wife used to fart when she was nervous.
Sean left a useful pause before he said that. Pauses and silence is often good in therapy because it's space to take things in. It gives you a chance to process the last bit of a conversation before moving on.
She had all sorts of wonderful little idiosyncrasies. She used to fart in her sleep. I'm sorry I shared that with you.
There's always a bit of debate about how much a counsellor should share about their own lives, because sometimes clients want their counsellors to keep a bit of distance for a lot of different reasons. maybe I'll leave a few in the comments, but one big reason is that the more time you, the counsellor, spends talking about yourself means the less time there is for your client to open up, to express whatever they're feeling. Because, you know, this is about them, it's their space. If you hog the time and take over, then they won't feel as confident that this is their space. And like I said, there's lots of other reasons, but there's also reasons it's good for the counsellor to share, and, you know, this is where we're getting into the different approaches of counselling, and the debate about how distant or close a counsellor should be. I don't think there's a right or wrong approach. You know, it's just whatever the counsellor is most natural working with, and what would suit each individual client best.
One night it was so loud it woke the dog up.
So again, humour is a good thing in small doses. It's good for establishing connection, and obviously having a connection is essential to the work. However, there has to be a point to this beyond just establishing a connection through humour. If they were just sharing humour simply to build rapport, then it'd be promoting a lazy atmosphere. You know, it always has to be about the meaning.
But Will, she's been dead 2 years, and that's the shit I remember. It's wonderful stuff, you know? Little things like that.
The point he's coming to is that true beauty lies in imperfection. It's a strange point we often forget as people, but it's true. Imperfection is real, it's honest, sincere, there's something we can actually connect to, emotionally respond to. Whereas people who try to be perfect, it's false and insecure, you know? We empathise with vulnerability because it touches us. Vulnerability is beauty in that sense.
Those are the things I miss the most. The little idiosyncrasies that only I knew about. That's what made her my wife. People call these things imperfections, but they're not. Oh, that's the good stuff. And then we get to choose who we let into our weird little worlds.
I think it's quite uncommon any counsellor would go off on a long point like this. I said earlier it's best to keep your points snappy if you want your client to take them in. Here it is different because he was telling a story to metaphorically explain it, like a fable, you know. Either way, it's uncommon to make long points like this because the counsellor's job isn't to tell the client what to do. Remember how I criticised Henry for that in the first episode? Sean is technically doing the same thing here. You know, you shouldn't be telling your client what to do because you don't fully understand them. You can never fully understand them, meaning your advice might be wrong. Plus, Will has spent his entire life with people telling him what to do, and we know just how much authority gets Will's back up. Your job is to help the client explore himself. You know, it's the client's journey. He's got to be in the driving seat because it's his world and his emotions. But this is a movie, and it needs more driving dialogue that makes things happen. And even so, there are times it is okay to tell your client what to do. Sometimes it is good to step out of that counsellor role a bit and be more like a father or mother figure. Like Sean is technically doing, being a father figure here. For Will, someone whose only experiences of father figures have been abusive ones, maybe that's important. Anyway, I said about making points snappy, and as such, he brings this long stream of advice back down to the killer concluding line.
You're not perfect, sport. This girl you met, she isn't perfect either. But the question is whether or not you're perfect for each other.
And then Sean very naturally, very lightly lets the serious point drift back away into a bit of playful humour to ease the sting.
The only way you're finding out that one is by giving it a shot. You certainly won't learn from an old fucker like me. Even if I did know, I wouldn't tell a pissant like you.
So having gone on this long lecture, it is useful that Sean tries to ease things up again. He brings humour back in, including self-deprecating humour, to distance himself from seeming too much like someone playing the wise guru, you know? And you see that self-deprecation more in his next line.
You told me every other fucking thing. Jesus Christ. Fucking talk more than any shrink I ever seen in my life.
I teach this shit. I didn't say I know how to do it.
Anyway, there's then a pause in conversation again, and Will says,
You ever think about getting remarried?
My wife's dead.
Hence the word remarried.
She's dead.
Well, I think that's a super philosophy, Sean. I mean, that way you could actually go through the rest of your life without ever really knowing anybody.
I said a lot in the first video about Will turning the counselling on the counsellor. He does it again here, but this time it's not a malicious attack. It's playful, it's lightly teasing, just like Sean has been playful and lightly teasing to Will, so, you know, you see how it comes back? That's good, that's building connection. And clients will often mock and ridicule you in sessions. Here it is light and teasing in a kind way. Other times, like in the first session, it can be malicious. It's for this that good counsellors can't really ever have big egos. You'd be surprised just how many ways the client can find to insult you or pick at you a bit if they want to. You know, your voice, your clothes, times you stumble over words, times you mishear or misunderstand things or whatever. You know, it's fairly common you'll have sessions with certain clients that do their utmost to make you feel completely stupid or humiliated or whatever else. Often they need to. You know, often it's a way of expressing something. I'm making you feel like an idiot because that's how I feel deep down, or humiliated or attacked or whatever. Even just being able to knock you down a peg levels the playing field again, you know, when they feel small beneath you, because sometimes they inevitably will. Like now, Sean has just lectured Will about women technically, so, you know, he no doubt feels a bit beneath Sean right now. In that sense, of course he wants to knock Sean down a peg and even things out again, and it's good to let him do that. Be a bit amused by it, if anything. And Will is incredibly smart, so he finds an incredibly witty way of getting back at Sean, which is using his own words against him. And you see Sean smile because that's how he should be. You know, playfully amused by the teasing rather than feeling attacked. And then he says,
"Time's up."
And time's up is a phrase that can feel a bit like checkmate to the client. You see, it makes Will a bit uncomfortable here, and it does make most clients a bit uncomfortable because it does feel a little bit like being kicked out, and that can feel a little bit like being rejected. You know, if my counsellor truly cared, he'd let me stay until I was ready to go, sort of thing. And that is fair enough, you know, I mean, imagine you went round a mate's for a drink or something, and he said he only had until 8 o'clock for whatever reason, but then imagine if when it hits 8, he just went, "Oh, time's up," and fell completely silent, expecting you to leave. That'd feel rude as hell, wouldn't it? In that scenario, you'd probably let things overrun a few minutes, you know, probably you slowly get up and you make some vague goodbyes and you walk them to the door, all that sort of stuff. Just saying time's up feels so much more abrupt. But counsellors do it because boundaries are incredibly important for counselling. I spoke about it more in the second episode, so I won't repeat myself. I'll just say it's important to be consistent with your timings because then the client can learn to trust that, the stability of it. The fact it doesn't bend or sway week to week becomes something he can rely on. That is the end of the session though, which means it's the end of this video. So maybe I should just say time's up and fall silent. I won't. Thanks for your support. Thanks for watching. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment any thoughts, criticisms, questions you have. I understand this session I've been analysing doesn't have as much in it as the last two. That's just the nature of this bit of the film. There's a lot of good sessions ahead that I'm eager to do videos on, particularly the It's Not Your Fault session. That'll be a great one to analyse, but we're still a bit away from that yet. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Yeah, leave your questions, your thoughts, criticisms, anything you have. Subscribe if you're new, and hopefully see you next time.